Yeah, I want to be really clear with my view and with also the abolitionist view, and I can't speak for everybody and all abolitionists, and I want to be sensitive to that. And if you speak to any abolitionist, they'll give you a different point of view, and it's not totally
because they're fucking anarchists.
But they're not anarchists. They some of them are, but. We're not looking to reform. We're looking to abolish the prison, the institution of the prison. And more than that, we're looking to abolish or like get rid of the conditions that have created a society where it exists and like where people's needs are met. Like it's a very encompassing view. And it's also a horizon. Like nobody who's an abolitionist think it's going to happen tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And they're not naive. You know what I mean? They're really not. They're doing great work and they have a lot of hope and they're great people. Love them. They're great people. And sorry, I did it like that. I'm so sorry for doing that. But
what? What did you?
That was my Donald Trump.
Oh, that was your Donald Trump?
Dude,
that was so bad. You're going to fucking jail for cringe, dog. How about that? I am not in favor of abolishing prisons for that and that only. Okay. Let's talk about that. So we were going to inevitably broach a subject. I am a spokesperson for the most part, right?
Prisons.
Yes, exactly. I have been hired by the private prison.
Hasan Piker facility.
Yes, the prison industrial complex has hired me. No, I'm a spokesperson in the sense that like when I'm doing advocacy, I try to direct my commentary to the audience that I assume is listening, right? Okay. And in most circumstances, I feel like the audience that's listening are normies, right? They're not like very well read. They're just getting started. Maybe they like Bernie Sanders or something. My audience at this point on a Sunday morning is going to be a little bit more the core audience. So obviously this is like a more well-read part of the audience. But in general, I like to cut my commentary for like the average person who hasn't thought about these ideas thoroughly. And that's why I always say that functionally speaking, I am on board with a lot of what the abolitionists advocate for, but I will not admit that readily when I'm doing commentary on a particular subject, because I feel like that makes me a more effective communicator. And what I mean by that is I completely understand, as far as all I've read, I completely understand the theory behind abolition. I can even steel man it for you if you would like, prison abolition. But I still don't agree with it as far as, in the interim period or the short-term period, or maybe even in the perfect society as well. But that does not mean that I believe that, we should be incarcerating in the way that we are currently in the United States of America. Like, I'm not one of those people who's like, well, about the Boston bomber? Like,
I don't, and like, I don't expect people to be on board with it the second they hear about it, especially like, it's more about learning about it and thinking about it and the fact that we take these systems for granted, the way the police work, the way the prison industrial complex works. So it's not saying, hey, we're going to do this tomorrow, and that's not what abolitionists think, and that's not what they're asking for. And I do think, talking about reform, there are reforms that are useful and reforms that are not as useful. Ruth Wilson Gilmore calls it the non-reformist reform. It's like things that take power away from these institutions, like take funding away and putting it into social programs, or having civilian review boards for police departments, which is also sort of debated, or closing down prison complexes, bail reform that gets more people out of jail, like stuff like that. That's helpful, but not necessarily taking it apart brick by brick. You know? But I think it's all these people, all the normies and the people you're talking to can be on board for saying, hey, this thing is inflated and we need to get away from it. And that's not incongruent with like abolitionists. Like, we're getting there, right?
No. That's 100%. But you're a full-blown abolitionist.
Hell yeah.
You don't believe that prisons should exist.
That's right.
They are obsolete. That's what you're saying.
That's what,
our prisons. Are prisons obsolete? What is he doing? He's going into his bag. Wait a minute. What? Oh my God! It's Angela Davis.
It's for you. I brought this.
That's crazy. Angela Davis. Are prisons obsolete? Early fans of the show that have been watching for a long time know that I quote a lot of this book specifically, but thank you for this gift.
Yeah,
I will not be reading it. I hate reading. I've never read. I don't know how to read.
Okay. Yeah, no,
actually.
I figured. Well, I can do it in pictures for you.
Okay.
I'll do it later.
Oh, damn. I pulled up immediately. F-type prisons in Turkey were inspired by the recent emergence of the super maximum security or supermax prison in the United States, which presumes to control otherwise unmanageable prisoners by holding them in permanent solitary confinement and by subjecting them to varying degrees of sensory deprivation. In its 2002 World Report, Human Rights Watch paid particular attention to the concerns raised by the spread of ultra-modern super-maximum security prisons. Turkish prison system is actually very interesting.
So I brought a couple books for Hasan.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorites. It's Mariam Kaba. We do this till we free us. I really think you should read this. I think it's her essays and it's super digestible, and it's really great. She's the best. I brought you that one.
I don't know how to read. I told him I don't know how to read, and he's like, no, I'm going to bring books anyway. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about abolition. Okay. You want to abolish prisons. Yes. Why?
Why? Do you think that we should have abolished slavery?
Don't. No, yes, I do. I do.
Okay. So the foundation of the prison in the United States is based in slavery and anti-blackness and built in white supremacy. And those are the direct roots of it as we know it. And certainly for the last 60 years since like drug war with Nixon, but even before that, where the prison population in the United States has exploded. But even before that, it was once slavery ended, prisons became the alternative to it. Mm-hmm. So when I think that's like...
Okay, what's next? Okay. You're going to tell me Louisiana State Penitentiary is basically a plantation? Okay.
Yeah.
What? Oh, come on. Come on now.
I think that's a really important thing to think about is there was a time where people said, let's abolish slavery. And people said, come on, this is like part of what we do and we've got it going on and it's not so bad. And even Angela Davis in her book talked about how actually at the beginning of the prison system, it was almost worse than the plantation system because, and this is to say they're both horrible, right? But in her words, they had a buy-in when they owned slaves because it was their property. And then when the prison system came in, nobody technically owned the people anymore. So they could just use them freely and didn't care what happened to them. So it was even more brutal than the plantation system.
And now we have convict leasing.
Yeah.
Which is the same shit.
In California, people get paid,
firefighters?
A couple cents an hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's it is modern day slavery.
By the way, I don't disagree with any of that stuff.
Okay.
I completely recognize it. I talk about that all the time. This is not really a debate on that front. I agree with that. I guess my own perspective, if we're to like find an area of disagreement, if we were to look for an area of disagreement, I think the only disagreement is, and this does not justify the current carceral state as it stands. I just want to qualify that immediately. But the only thing I would say is that there is a necessity for some form of institutionalization that is for rehabilitation overall, that is managed by medical professionals. But like there needs to be I feel like it's I don't know, I don't want to use the term containment, but I feel like if you've done something really fucked up, obviously for the most severe cases, like there needs to be I still believe that there needs to be like some democratically organized, completely civilian controlled group of individuals that go, okay, we have to look at this. We have to, we have to analyze this. We have to ensure that like, this person is like properly rehabilitated and can reintegrate into society and maybe for a duration, not out and about to continue doing what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So that's my belief, that there is there are edge cases always. Does not, again, justify the current existing structure at all. So functionally, I am on board with everything that the abolitionists are fighting for at this stage. But as far as antisocial personality disorder related crimes or things that like our current level of medicine cannot account for with respect to rehabilitation, there needs to be like a holding.
I think we're talking about a couple things. I want to sort of like recognize my own limitations in terms of talking about some of these things, especially when it comes to people who are struggling with like mental illness and other things. And I think like I'm careful. I'm cautious about that. Also just because I feel like we all accidentally, even like when we have good intentions, are like especially with Jordan Neely and everything that happened with Jordan Neely, like sort of deputizing ourselves to say what was going on with the person, what their situation was. I think it's kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit. Like I understand people's concerns and like kind of what you're talking about, but I really think it's important to recognize that we don't we're talking about a world that we're not sure exactly what it actually looks like because we haven't really lived it yet. And we have a set of,
I agree.
And so it's like, but I don't believe at all that it's utopian. I think that it's moving towards that world again. And I hear what you're saying about like democratic alternatives and stuff like that. It is a centering, in terms of harm, we want to center people who are harmed, victims, which our current system doesn't do. And we want to create practices to center those people and then ask a question, which is, how do we prevent this from happening again with this person? And what were the circumstances that led for this to happen, right? And what you're talking about kind of is, I'm very weary of the idea of like social death, you know what I mean? Like, and that's kind of what the prison is like. And even if you talk to people who have mental health crises and get into one of these facilities, those can be just as bad as prisons. They can be brutal.
Oh, it can be worse than prisons.
Oh yeah, it can be a horrible place.
Yeah.
So
it wouldn't work in the way that it does. Even like what I'm talking about right now, it's not like prison. There's no solitary confinement. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think that I also don't like ceding any ground. Because I think it still lets this system exist. Like even the idea of just like when we just talk about, well, that's a little bit unreasonable. That seems a little bit too out there. So we just need these reforms. The reforms become institutionalized. Like they just become part of the business as usual. That's always been very true of the police. And if you look at the history of policing in the United States, it's like the last 100 years. Every time something happens, they have a commission.
Yeah.
They investigate. They say we need new technology, and they've been doing it for like they did it in the 1930s. They did it in the 1960s. The Kerner Commission. So
the overdrive came like with I guess special weapons and tactics, especially right or surplus programs and it's just militarization. Militarization of the police. Gets poured. All the time. They're constantly saying like, oh, we need to fucking train them better. We need to train them better. Right. And that's why I find myself obviously like functionally on your side of this conversation. It's just that when I'm communicating it, I think when I'm communicating to a broader audience, everyone is always going to say, what do you do with the pedophiles?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What do you do with the pedophiles? And the reality is, or what do you do with serial killers? This is 1% of the fucking prison population. And obviously is not like justifiable for the current carceral state that we exist under. Because 99% of the prisoners, their crimes are born out of their material conditions. Actually, 100% of the prisoners, their crimes are born out of material conditions, but which are solvable. But there's always going to be edge cases. There's always going to be edge cases which people will hit you in the head over.
Yeah, I mean, there are some. Yeah, I mean, yes, we're talking about it's a small percentage, but obviously people think about them, and when they think about particularly bad crimes that they don't like, and I think part of the question that we need to ask in that situation is, what do we do? What do we do today? Like, what do we do about those things today? And like, we don't do that much about those things today. The police, they actually get an arrest and they go through a prosecution process on like less than 10% of the things that they investigate and that get reported. And then in terms of, when we're talking about really nasty stuff, very, very low conviction rates, things that even go to trial, people that actually go through the system and the process. So yeah, we're talking about this infinitesimally small portion of the overarching population. But it comes up again and again and again. And I think you actually kind of put it very well, which is it can't justify the entire system as it is. Abolitionists,
and I don't believe that.
Abolitionists don't like this is important too. Abolitionists don't believe that like violence will like cease to exist in the world. You know what I mean?
So how do you deal with it?
I think community-based alternatives. I mean, like I think restorative justice practices, which were originally created in indigenous communities, which brought together the person who did the harm and the person who was harmed, and sort of like actually had the community aspect. And for smaller things like, we're
getting the community to pelt the pedophile. Is that what we're doing?
I mean, when it comes to that stuff, I mean, like, okay, Larry Nassar, the guy who was, and also this is a trigger warning for people because of what the subject matter of this is. Larry Nassar, did all this, sexually assaulted all of these girls on the USA gymnastics team. This was back a couple of years ago. And he was sentenced to a zillion years in jail, like 140 whatever years in jail. Larry Nassar going to prison, there's a problem because if we like it when the system work today. Do you know what I mean? We like that. It makes us feel good. But the truth is, like, it didn't actually work because Larry Nassar was able to abuse people for years and years and years and get away with it. And what about the institutions that allowed him to do that and the people who turned a blind eye to him doing that? So we need to, not as like a normie who's just learning about abolition, because it takes a little while, but as abolitionists, we need to like recognize that the systems don't justify, these microscopic wins don't justify the system. And it's still a system that will replicate itself again and again.
No, I mean, I agree with all that.
Yeah.
I do. I agree with all that, but the reason why I guess qualify, or the reason why I clarify that, like, I still need, like, or I still believe that not that this justifies the current system, and not that this justifies prisons as we understand it currently, but I believe that there's a need for like a level of containment for a brief duration, even if, and it's not, and the reason for that is not like punishment. I'm not even talking about like containment for punishment. It's more so containment for, let's say, a medical diagnosis, which can be very complicated. This is like I said, antisocial personality disorder related crimes are, as it stands, and maybe perhaps forever, impossible to diagnose accurately and impossible to correctly understand and stop. Like the system that we have is like what, the psychopath's manual. It's fucking bullshit. It's outdated. It's antiquated. It sucks. The UK, as far as I understand it, has like basically a permanent asylum, like permanent institutionalization protocol set in place. Once you're like, once you are identified as like a psychopathic criminal, which is insane to think about. But there's certainly no current way of adequately dealing with it, and I don't even know if there ever will be. But there is a need for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I still disagree. I think I understand what you're getting at. I think the reality is, and even based on the conversation we're having right now, I mean, I don't have all the answers, right? Obviously, but it's also not on each individual person. It's us as like a collective in solving this problem. And I think that should be the focus when we talk about it, because a lot of the time gets kind of derailed in terms of this conversation of, serial killers. Yeah, the guy's doing this, the guy's doing that. And again,
which is why I usually don't have this conversation, for the record.
Yeah.
Because I think it's unproductive, because I don't agree with it. Like, I don't agree with the other side. Like, I'm not trying to justify prisons and it existing by bringing up edge cases. You know what I mean? Because it's irrelevant in the grand scheme of things because of how much work that needs to be done to even work within the system that we have currently to try and, make marginal improvement.
Yeah.
Improvements as best as we can.
But also, like, what does a society look like where people have their basic needs met and the resources that they need? Like, we do have kind of a vision of what an abolitionist world looks like in wealthy neighborhoods.
Yes. Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So like, that's, the cops aren't walking around the wealthy neighborhoods. You have to like call them if you needed them to come there. They're not policing or criminalizing those populations.
Absolutely.
So
agreed.
I think like we need to think about things in that way. And I think, as people who are kind of, maybe we don't all totally agree and you have your reservations about it and everything, we're all on this like train together and we're heading towards this destination. And I think we can get there. I think we can be productive together in getting there. But
yeah.
There's these like spooky, scary cases, but like it's something that we can't know fully and nobody has the perfect answer to, because we don't exist in that world. We live in one where it's the world that we know, where we spend $100 billion+ a year on policing, where we have prison industrial complex that's billions of dollars, where there, that's the world we exist in, where every day the New York Post is like, this guy came out of jail and
ultimately
cut this guy's head off.
Ultimately, that's precisely the reason why I never have this conversation, because like it's ridiculous to like dunk on abolition as a concept, even though I do like making fun of anarchists and saying they're smelly, or even abolitionists and calling them anarchists, like Cinemarxism in the chat, who's like fucking very upset at me. He's great.
I think
great
cameraman,
director.
Are sometimes upset because they think that we're going to like a system, like the same system, and I believe that that's the case. But I understand the concern.
Well, but no, my point was this. The reason why I usually don't debate abolition.
Well, we're not debating it. We're talking about
even
it.
talk about abolition all too much, is because
homies.
it's so. Of course, it's so far in the it's so far out in the future, like it's so beyond the pale that like I don't care if someone calls me an abolitionist. Other than optically speaking, I think that it's better to not say that if I'm in a conversation, because everyone is going to straw man and gotcha once they they say like, oh, you're an abolitionist. Like they're going to be like, what are you going to do about the rapist? Like I could, if I wanted to, and you've probably had this conversation many times, trap you in numerous different like rhetorical traps that make it optically impossible to speak on the matter and effectively communicate your side without just basically saying we have to do community, or we have to do like community-based solutions to like violent pedophiles and shit like that. And it's not a justification for the current carceral state or any prison system in general. So it's like, I get it, I understand it, which is why I don't talk about it usually.
Yeah, and I mean, I can lead a horse to water, but I can't. Like, okay, if there's not a carceral system, I mean, I don't like saying it, you know what I mean? Like, and someone has done some, what happens if somebody kills somebody else, right? What's the resolution to that?
Yeah.
I mean, there's different resolutions. There's like reparations. There's, having someone pay, doing stuff for the family, admitting wrong, XYZ, but also you can't in an abolitionist society, hypothetically, you couldn't stop like somebody from going and doing something to that person.
Fucked up. Yeah.
So like, I don't know, you know what I mean? But I don't think that's the answer. Like, I don't like a violence alternative. I think it's more about just recognizing how it is. Also, Ole has a really good video on this that she just put out.
I mean, they're killing my friends.
I'm an abolitionist. Yes, that does mean I believe we need to abolish prisons, policing, and America's entire criminal system as it exists. But we recognize that the powers that be won't simply open up all the cells and close all the courts tomorrow, just as we recognize that we do not yet have the resources, the institutions, and the support systems in place to make that feasible. But we also recognize that mass incarceration is invested in ensuring that we never do. Which is why the first thing you should know is that abolition is a vision for the future. A world
I agree
where
with
we
all of
invested
these
in police,
takes,
courts,
by
and
the way.
prisons.
That's what I told you.
Because instead of pumping money
of
into the
course.
criminalization of the
That's
most
why I say, like,
disenfranchised among
optically
us, we put that money.
That's why I say, optically speaking, if I'm going to be making an argument, like it's one that I think. Here's the thing, okay? The difference between policing as the way that we currently understand it, policing as a theory versus policing as a practice are two fundamentally different things, even though policing as an institution was designed around, asset extraction, asset management, protection of capital, protecting and serving the interests of the wealthy, no matter whichever way that it existed, either in the North with like, around trade routes, around like harbors and whatnot, versus in the South with slave catching and the like. So I get all of that, but the anarchist or the abolitionist solution to that would be some form of democratically organized group of individuals that are upholding the democratically voted on hierarchies, I guess, that everyone in said community agrees on. To the average Joe, when you describe it like that, it's just policing in a truly representative democracy. It's still technically people that are going to be tasked with upholding, law and order, kind of, or at least like maintaining the presence that there is like some kind of law and order.
I don't know that I necessarily agree. I think that, look, inside. Again, it's kind of hard to talk about, but like inside this like area that this weird area we're talking about, yeah, there's this democratic idea, but also abolition as a concept is also thinking about like your community as like your neighbors, like having relations, because this is also part of the problem with capitalism is that we are so atomized and like separated from one
alienation
another.
And isolation.
And obviously the vibes right now in this country are so supremely fucked up. And I think that is also a reflection of how atomized we are. But when you have a community and you hear something going on next door, and you hear two people yelling and you maybe think it's like a domestic violence situation, when you know those people and they know you, and you can knock on that door and not think they're going to shoot you, the guy's going to shoot you, that's a very different situation. Or when your stereo goes missing and you know that it's your cousin that stole it or whatever, you're going to be like, why did Jerry steal my stereo? And you're going to call your aunt and you're going to be like, he stole my stereo. Can you get me a new stereo? Or, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's important to think about it in that way. Like it's a fundamentally different way of being and also like, again, meeting people's material needs. And it's not, and please, for the love of God, it's not utopian, right? Because we have the resources to do all these things, but we make these policy choices in terms of the money which I know you know. I know you know that. But like it's a policy choice, and then that's it.
Yeah, but we don't just exist. We do exist in a broader society as well, though. Like we exist in a larger formation than just like the simple smaller communities that you are talking about, which is why there still is like a need for some level of enforcement. Is what I end up arguing on the side of like. There needs to be a group of individuals that everyone is like, yeah, that's great. These guys are the guys who are going to operate the courts, for example. I suspect that you still believe in like a court system, right? Like you believe that there needs to be like some level of adjudication, judgment, like a court process, even if it's to like uphold simple contracts, even if it's to resolve simple matters, whether it be community organized and is like small, there needs to be a means of arbitration, a place where you can do that.
I think, if that's a system that becomes imposed because of a collective, my preference is like smaller autonomous I mean, I don't want to get super in the weeds on this, but like I understand your trepidation and I hear what you're saying. I think a lot of people do this, and I think I would just ask you and like people to try to fight the inclination to give in. Like, I feel like it's ceding ground in a way. Like I hear you, but I think that idea of like there needs to be enforcement or there needs to be this, I think it is giving too much credit to the system and not realizing that even in our own minds, we have like reproduced the prison in our own minds. That's what I think.
What do you mean by that?
It's hard for us to imagine a different world. You know what I mean? I agree. It's hard for us to imagine a different world.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of what I mean. And we reproduce these things, and we even what we believe is possible is different. And I think we should have like a more expansive view and a more hopeful view. And at least for me, that's like, I hear what you're saying, right? But like even for me, I'm like, all right, but you know what? Let's do it live. Fuck it. Like, let's go. Let's do this.
Okay. All right. Fair. No, I understand that. It's like, I mean, it's the Mark Fisher quote. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. Yeah. And I agree, and that doesn't sway me or that doesn't change my mind on my opinions on capitalism and abolishing it. So why not the same for prisons? It's just that the difference there, for me at least, is like I don't have all the answers for that either. Right? What a perfect transitional socialist state looks like. How do you abolish? How does the state cease to exist? All these are questions that I do not have answers for. Certainly, many other people much smarter than me have thought about it, theorized it. But for the life of me, I still cannot comprehend a world in which like there's no enforcement of people who are just gonna, because there's always gonna be like the very small, slim, like silly people that are going to, behave in bad faith. And it's kind of like the way I see it, for example, do I believe that trans women, for example, should be able to compete in athletics with cis women? Absolutely. What if I were to say no right now? I was just like a transphobic
I would honestly
dude.
Kill you if you did that right
out of nowhere. I was just like randomly transphobic. You had no idea.
Just go
no,
full Joe Rogan.
No, I of course I do.
Oh
right? I do. I don't think that it's like it's unfair or anything like that. And are there, for example, like game breakers a little bit? Like, can certain bad faith actors break that? Like people who claim that they are non-binary, but like they're doing it specifically to compete to make a point. Like Republicans, they do that from time to time. I'm sure you've seen it, where they can't like find an example of it in the real world, in the wild, so they make that example up themselves. Where they're like, right. Yeah, well, see, I did it. Like I claim to be a woman, and I'm doing some random fucking weightlifting competition. I have an abolitionist perspective on that, where I just like, who cares ultimately? Because I feel like the stakes are not as high. Do you see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Because I ultimately consider that to be like frivolous, no matter what happens. Yeah, like Zuby did that fucking weirdo, right? Or the milk porn dude, the dude who like put on like gigantic breasts at school. Remember, like that's not a trans person, but he was like, I'm trans, and like everyone used that as an example to be like, this is why trans people are weird and gross. Like we gotta make sure that they're criminalized or whatever, right? And it's fucking ridiculous. Ultimately, though, those edge cases, even if there isn't like proper enforcement on those edge cases, I don't think that it's going to create like a major, I don't think that it's going to like legitimately destroy society in the way that we operate. And the stakes are not as high in like athletic competitions or whatnot. So a little bit of like scumbaggery can be dealt with, in my opinion, through the individual community that is like self-selecting or like whatever commission is in place for that athletic endeavor that people are engaging in. They can make that assessment individually in a decentralized manner. Whereas when it comes to criminal justice, I do feel like it's not a concession I can make for things that I personally believe in, even if I do understand that like solving the underlying material conditions would eradicate, like, as you said, this doesn't happen in rich communities, but crime still does happen in rich communities.
Sure.
And how do you deal with that is something that I just can't get over for me in particular, because I feel like that's a much, like, the stakes are higher than simply athletic competition. I just keep going back to the same point over and over again. All right, let's watch this, and then we'll go through points point by point.
Crime, like poverty, unemployment, poor housing, starved school systems, mental health issues, and more. We must reckon with what our criminal system is to understand why abolition isn't about depriving us of the means to stop crime or address harm. It's allowing us to design a system where we do those things for the very first time, because that is not what we currently do. Mass incarceration is slavery, a fact that the 13th Amendment explicitly acknowledges by abolishing slavery except for anyone convicted of a crime. In the same breath that the US government purported to abolish slavery, they established the means to continue the practice. And slavery is as much a business as it is a sin. And a business is meant not just to continue, but to expand, to make more and more money. Nearly 2 million people are incarcerated in America, over 400,000 of whom have not had a trial or been convicted of any crime. Nearly 60% of all incarcerated people are Black or Latino, and the vast majority of incarcerated people earned wages below the poverty line prior to their arrest. And America makes over $11 billion yearly in goods produced by prison labor, both private and public. Incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people owe at least $27.6 billion in fines and fees nationwide. Their families spend over $2.9 billion in commissaries each year, in addition to another $14.8 billion in costs associated with moving, eviction, and homelessness brought on by these cases. No system that is designed and maintained in furtherance of making money by subjugating and imprisoning specific populations for allegedly committing certain harms simultaneously intends to rid us of those harms and thus their means of production. So if slavery is a system of bondage where a person is treated as property, deprived of their freedom and personal liberty, and forced to perform labor for another's gain, mass incarceration is slavery. And it's making the rich richer and absolutely no one safer. But I understand that in spite of everything I'm going to say to you, if this is the first time you're hearing about abolition, or maybe you even know a little about it, it might seem impossible or crazy. And that's fair. The first time I heard about abolition, I was a junior in college being introduced to Our Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis by my thesis advisor, and it sounded crazy to me too. But if you want to change someone's mind about something, the first thing you need to understand, what I believe my professor understood when she referred me to Angela Davis, instead of engaging how taken aback I was at the very concept of abolition, is that nobody ever abandons their entire worldview the first time it's challenged. It doesn't matter how many facts, stats, case studies, compelling narratives, or undeniable evidence you have on your side, people simply do not rip the foundation out from under themselves at the first indication that there may be cracks. People believe what they're taught, and rarely on their own do they have occasion to question what was presented to them as fundamental truths. The sky is blue, grass is green, cops are good, robbers are bad, justice is served when someone goes to jail. But just having it brought to my attention that we didn't always have or rely on prisons, combined with the realization that there are other countries that do not invest in punitive prison systems and instead invest in genuinely care-based, community-based, rehabilitative models, immediately shifted my world. Just learning that it was possible to have a society without prisons instantly diminished how radical the mere suggestion had seemed to me, because up until that point, I'd never noticed that because I was born into a world with prisons, I thought they were as natural to earth as dirt, water, and air, rather than the man-made institutions that they are. But before we can understand how we get to abolition and why it's necessary, we first must understand why mass incarceration and prisons aren't. and exactly what they're meant to accomplish. When you say you want to abolish the prison industrial complex, or more specifically, policing in prisons, one of the first things people ask you is how then will we stop crime? And the premise that underlines that question, that our existing system does this, is wrong.
I agree with that. Yeah, like I don't think that our current system stops it. Obviously, if they did, America would be the crime-free utopia. It would be like literally the least, like there would be no fucking crime. We technically have 25% of the entire world's prisoner population inside of our borders. I mean, unless we fucking incarcerate every single citizen, like it's not stopping. It doesn't seem to be. We have horrible rates of violent crime in comparison to that. It seems like maybe the underlying material conditions, poverty, is what is causing a lot of this crime to continue happening. She brought up a really good point as far as like care-based structures, right? Like rehabilitation-focused forms of criminal justice. I don't know if Olayemi's talking about like Norway or whatnot, and I feel like that's an example that gets used all the time. I like to point to social democracies, which of course I understand are still still rely on third world exploitation and natural resource extraction to exist in the way that they do. But like when you look at domestic policy in Norway, especially criminal justice versus America, it's dramatically better.
Sure.
It's still not the best, and there are still problems, right? I'm not saying that like they have everything figured out, but I like to use that comparison to show what is possible and show that like that is a successful, viable alternative to what we have, that also kind of, in my opinion, still proves that there is like a necessity for some form of containment.
You slipping that in there, man. Just like the knife in me every time.
Yeah, but
no, I think yeah. I mean, I hear you. I think that part of the issue in the United States specifically is that it's so racialized, that the prison system is so racialized. And
yeah.
I mean, obviously the history there, but even just, the current enforcement and, the majority of people in there are people of color. They're also the people who are constantly criminalized and surveilled by the police. Yeah. That it's hard to imagine that any massive reforms, which unfortunately even like in our political climate seem like impossible, even those reforms like still wouldn't be as effective, right? Like
it wouldn't.
It's good, it's good to have like baselines maybe, but I would point back to that idea of like the non-reformist reform. Like I'm not against reforms, right? I'm not against helping. I wasn't against bail reform. It was great. It got a lot of people out in New York. It was really helpful. I'm against things that like maintain power structure or like build them up or give more capacity versus like, kind of taking it down. That's a little bit or a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's still better.
You want to fight?
Marginal improvements. Well, I mean, what happens when one party loses?
I don't know. You tell me.
I'm just saying, like, no cops, no.
I got the strap.
No cop. Oh, I have it right here. It's on my end.
You don't know how fast my hands are.
It's on my side of the table. Yeah, no jail anyway, so fuck it. YOLO, why not?
Does not address, stop, or prevent crime because that's not what it's intended to do. In fact, it's meant to reproduce it. America's criminal system is a vehicle for maintaining racial, social, and economic inequality by criminalizing poor Black and brown communities, using them for labor, and saddling them with debt, trauma, and rap sheets whose lifelong collateral consequences can rarely be outrun. It's not a coincidence that the same communities dubbed high crime areas are those most under-resourced and remain that way generation after generation. We all want to live in a society that is free of crime and the social ills that reproduce it. But continuing to invest in policing and mass incarceration of communities whose well-being we've never invested in only takes us further and further away from that goal. In America, the police killed at least 1,195 people in 2020 that we know of, and they've already killed 320 people this year. Black people were 26% of people killed by police in 2022, despite being only 13% of the population. According to the Vera Institute of Justice, police arrest someone every 3 seconds in this country. Yet, a 2020 review from University of Utah professor Shima Bergholm found that police solve just 2% of all major crimes. But the United States has the...
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
You have a... Yeah, no. You have a 50-50 shot in the United States of America of getting away with murder.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I like those odds.
Yeah, it's like... It's pretty wild to think about. Actually, no. It's the majority is... you don't have a 50-50 shot. You have like a 51% shot of getting away with murder.
And I mean,
even
sure. If you look at like clearance rates, those don't always tell the whole.
Yeah,
because
there's also people that are falsely imprisoned, like
right.
people who are not guilty.
Yeah,
but it's much more convenient for the institutions to say, all right, you're guilty, you're going to jail, fuck it, YOLO. I don't think that like the number. I still don't think that the number of people that are that were found guilty of a crime but they were actually innocent is at, I don't think it's like a 50-50 situation, but especially with like.
But okay, wait, but like. Also think about the things that we criminalize, right? I mean, it's like...
Oh, I'm talking about murder and stuff.
Okay.
No, I wasn't... No, dog, I'm not talking about... No. I'm 100% on board. I'm 100% on board with like, all low-level offenses, like pretty much everything that people do, I recognize they do because they have to. Like they have to find, whether it be selling drugs or even all the way up to like extreme cases that you would consider extreme cases of violent crime, even like rape and things of that nature are, in my opinion, absolutely crimes that are rehabilitatable, I guess, if that's the correct term for it. And also the best way to solve it is not necessarily draconian punitive measures, which are demonstrably not successful in playing a role in deterrence. Because if that was the case, America wouldn't have any of it at all, right? But instead, to solve that, you have to look at the cycle of poverty and crime.
I think there are, it is a hard thing to talk about, and it is a hard position to have, because it isn't always, we're talking about like a low level thing. And I think it's important we also not just talk about low level things, because like more than half of the people who are in, state who are incarcerated in state prisons are there for technically what is considered a violent crime. And I think we should, it's important to dive into like what is a violent crime, because like only 3% of burglaries that happen actually involve like violence between two people. Like the vast majority of them, they don't even see the other person. Like it's in like the front of a house or in an apartment building or something like that. So like the way violent crime is even defined by the law can vary drastically state to state. In Kentucky, it could be like if you have ammonia for making like methamphetamine and you're like transporting it, that can be a violent crime. There's just like all these different definitions. So even when we hear the term violent crime, it might not be something where we think of actually a person, but like obviously there are things where someone is harmed, right? And I agree with what you're saying, which is how do we create alternatives to prevent those things from happening in the first place? Like why does the environment exist?
It's
and like
crime prevention does not happen but with policing, 100%. Yes. Crime prevention only happens by solving the underlying reasons as to why this exists. Like trying to eradicate patriarchal constructs is a significantly better solution to trying to eradicate like rape, for example.
Well, it's also
than it is to just like jail rapists. Like it's about stopping it before it happens.
The highest incarceration rate in the world and spends an estimated $300 billion yearly on policing in prisons, a figure that has continued to skyrocket despite record drops in crime. Yet, political leaders in the media continue to sensationalize and manufacture crime waves to scare the public into feeling unsafe, no matter how divorced that feeling is from reality, so that we continue to support inflated police budgets, militarized police departments, and incarcerating residents of the most under-resourced communities. Still, people ask abolitionists, what will we do about the rapists and the murderers without prisons? First, it's worth noting that more than 80% of arrests nationwide are for misdemeanors, low-level, and non-violent offenses. Rape, murder, and other horrific and sensationalized crimes are simply not a reflection of the bulk of what's in our criminal system. They're just what receives the most media attention. Further and importantly, condemning violence doesn't stop it from reoccurring. Understanding and alleviating the causes of violence does. But to the question, what do we do about the rapists? To that I ask, what are we doing about them now? In a piece for The Guardian titled, Who Will Protect You from Rape Without Police?, Moira Donegan answers the question perfectly, and she says, and I quote, "But the notion that abolishing the police will have negative repercussions for women radically misunderstands both American policing and sexual violence. Police abolition need not be considered an abdication of the responsibility to protect women, but rather a way to fulfill it. Police never investigate most sexual violence because most sexual violence goes unreported. According to the Rape and
Or done by the police.
Incest National Network, or RAIN, a little less than 25% of sexual assaults are reported to the police, significantly less than other violent crimes. There is ample evidence that sexual assault victims who distrust the police are correct. Police departments systematically fail to make arrests in sexual assault cases, and their failures are mirrored throughout the justice system. According to RAIN, only 4.6% of sexual assaults ever lead to arrest, 4.6, and only 0.9% are ever referred by police to prosecutors. Conviction rates are also lower than for other violent crimes, in part because of police mishandling the sexual assault cases. Then there's this troubling fact.
Also, the idea that like cops are diving in front of dicks to like stop them, what do you think? Like they got a bulletproof vest on and they're like diving in front of a penis before it fucking, enters a body? Like, no, it's not how that works at all. And they barely do the thing that they're supposed to do, which is like investigate. They don't do that.
The police themselves are often perpetrators of gender violence, and they frequently use the privileges and protections of their job to hurt women with impunity. Police households have dramatically higher rates of domestic violence than other homes, with approximately 40% of officers having intimate partner violence in their households, compared to just 10% of the general population. Sometimes police failures to investigate sexual violence look like the result not just of stupidity, but outright duplicity, she says. One study of the New York Police Department discovered it was knowingly undercounting rapes in its public figures, using a deliberately strict definition of rape in order to shrink the number of reported rapes in New York. An inquiry into the NYPD found its Special Victims Unit division to be grossly dysfunctional, with officers instructed to simply not investigate misdemeanor sexual assault cases. Conservative estimates indicate that American police departments have over 200,000 untested rape kits in their possession, with DNA samples that could be used to identify rapists and prevent future assaults collecting dust, often because police have not bothered to send them to be tested. On top of that, a 2015 investigation by the Associated Press found that roughly 1,000 officers lost their badges in a 6-year period for rape, sodomy, and other sexual assault, sex crimes that included possession of child pornography, or sexual misconduct such as propositioning citizens or having consensual but prohibited on-duty intercourse. A 2003 national study by the Police Professionalism Initiative found that 40% of reported cases of police sexual misconduct involved teens, often young women involved in youth engagement and job shadowing programs. Despite our reluctance to state plainly what mass incarceration is, it's why abolition is neither radical nor unnecessary.
Okay, but she didn't talk about how
abolition is about preventing harm, and the fun.
But this is the point. The point is that like it still is going to exist, but the current means of solving it are not real, and they are actually making it worse. But the point is, optically speaking, no one, and I mean no one, is going to get on board with that, because they're going to say, okay, well, that's, most people don't, is what I'm saying. Most normies don't. They look at that and go, I haven't been able to figure out a good way to advocate for this to the Normans. You know what I mean? Where they will always still go back to like, okay, what about, rapists? Like, what do you do when someone rapes them? Do you just like go do a kumbaya circle? You know what I mean? That's just.
I mean, I think they're difficult questions, but I think it has to do with like restorative and transformative justice. So restorative justice is saying we talked about it a little bit, but the idea of you're centering the person who is harmed and you're asking what they need. And oftentimes in a restorative justice situation, it's like community members who lead sort of like an arbitration process where these two people come in and someone admits a harm that they have done, and they apologize to this person, they express remorse for it, and then they figure out a way for this person to, make some kind of amends for this harm that they've done. And I understand that some harms are far greater than others, but it's like, it's an alternative to a system that is purely punitive and tells you that there are good guys and bad guys, and we put the bad guys away, when we know that it's so much more complicated than that. And that's also just like not how life works, So I think, I get what you're saying, but I think ultimately what it boils down to is you are saying kind of some of the answers, which is like the system says it's about this, but actually it's not about this. It's not about safety. It's not about improving our lives and all these things. And it's actually exacerbating the problem and making it worse. And in fact, that historically is what it does and what it is by design. So we should get rid of that system. And I think like you're not totally at odds with it. You just don't love the idea of being like, yeah, I'm an abolitionist because then someone's going to say, what do I do in this situation?
But that, and also I still do believe that, but just like you do, I guess, that there is like a way to solve that. But, if people don't want to admit it, if people don't want to admit a crime, for example, like I still think that there's going to be need for detectives. I think
you just want to be a detective, and that's like why you have the strap.
No, I do not want to be a detective.
It's okay. You can admit it.
Detectives are still cops. I don't necessarily like cops.
Necessarily.
I don't like cops at all.
Fundamental recognition that what we're doing now doesn't do that because it's not meant to. Instead, it makes matters worse because it's meant to. Even if we believe that there are just bad, poor people doing violent things, what is solved by locking those people in a box and making them spend every waking moment defending themselves from violence, sexual assault, and other abuses, all while trying to survive the psychological abuses of incarceration? If we also saddle them with fines and criminal convictions that prevent them from ever leaving poverty or the circumstances that led them to prison, not only have we done nothing to address the violent crime that's been condemned, we've given them every reason to act violently in the future. Then those people are released and sent back into the same struggling, under-resourced communities. That's why mass incarceration only ensures that communities that were already plagued by crime and violence never escape it.